He's certainly a different character altogether.
The world sees your partnership with Prince and Princess of Wales as a unique job. But what do you think the nature of your job really is?
Well, the difficulty is, of course, that I dare say other people may think differently from what we do. But I think the first and most important thing, really, is that it's...
King Charles could barely keep his hands steady. His eyes had stopped moving. His face had changed. The authority that normally surrounded him had vanished, replaced by the expression of a man who had just encountered something he desperately wished he had never seen. Across the room, Camilla stood completely still. She had already read it. That was the part Charles could not escape. The document was connected to Diana, and according to the story now circulating inside palace circles, it was not simply another copy of the arrangements already associated with her estate. It was described as a private set of final instructions, material that had allegedly remained outside the version known publicly, and Camilla had discovered it before Charles knew it existed. What would you do if someone you trusted found a secret that could change everything you believed about your past, then chose to tell you only after reading it herself? If you think Charles deserved to know the truth, even when that truth hurts, like this video, share it and subscribe. Because sometimes staying silent is easier than facing what has been hidden. Hi viewers, if someone you loved had their final words hidden from you, would you want the truth, no matter how painful it was? Leave a simple yes or no in the comments, because that choice is at the heart of what happened next.
And you're here on this historic visit, 250 years of our country.
That's extraordinary.
How has your trip been?
Well, it's been whistle stop. It's been really good fun, but we have moved quite fast.
You've been to a lot of places, to quite a few.
We have, but it's been wonderful, and everybody's been very kind and welcoming.
Well,
It's always a pleasure to be here, and always lovely to be back in New York.
Charles finally looked up. His eyes met Camilla's, and for several seconds neither of them spoke. There was no royal ceremony in that room, no prepared statement, no carefully chosen phrase from a palace communications office. There was only a husband staring at a document connected to the woman whose death had remained one of the most painful chapters of his life, and a wife who had been holding a piece of that story behind his back. Then Charles reached for the page again. His fingers caught the corner. He turned it. The handwriting stopped him. It was unmistakable. The letters were uneven in places, hurried in others, as though the person writing them had known that every sentence might be the last chance to say something that could never be spoken publicly. At the bottom of the page was Diana's name. Charles inhaled sharply. The room seemed to shrink around him. According to the fictionalized royal scenario behind this story, Camilla had not gone searching for a weapon against Charles. The discovery began with an irregularity in old estate material, a reference that did not fit neatly with the documents already understood to exist. But once the hidden pages appeared, the matter became impossible to dismiss. There were questions about why the material had been separated. There were questions about who had known, and there was one question that mattered more than all the others. Why had Charles never been shown this? Camilla knew the answer might wound him. She also knew that keeping silent could make the wound deeper. The first page contained no explosive accusation. That almost made it worse. Diana wrote about memory, about being misunderstood, about people believing they knew what happened inside rooms they had never entered. Then came a sentence that changed the atmosphere completely. She had written that her sons might one day discover that the story they had inherited was not the whole story.
The Duchy of Cornwall areas that I could reach then and visit people and look at the farms and things. And so that was very convenient, but obviously it's been a great help. There's a lot to be done. It's going to be marvellous to have somebody to help sort it out.
It was 1977 that Charles came to stay as a friend of my sister Sarah's for a shoot. We sort of met in a ploughed field.
Slightly previous to that.
And what did you think then? What was your instinct?
Charles read that line twice. His jaw tightened. For years, he had lived with the consequences of a marriage that had collapsed under extraordinary public pressure. He had watched the world build its own version of that history. He had watched Diana become an icon, a symbol, a memory that millions of people interpreted through their own grief. But this page was different. It was personal, and it was waiting for him. Camilla watched Charles continue. He reached another paragraph. His breathing became slower. His eyes moved down the page, then stopped again. This time, the words were directed toward William and Harry. Diana had written about protecting them from the machinery surrounding the family. She had written about what could happen when private pain became public property. She had written about the danger of allowing duty to swallow the people underneath the titles. Charles lowered the page. Camilla still said nothing. That silence carried its own accusation. She had known. Not everything, perhaps. Not every sentence. Not every implication. But she had known enough to understand why Charles needed to see it. And now he was beginning to understand why she had hesitated. The document had not appeared with a neat explanation attached to it. Its origin, its custody, and the reason it had remained apart from other material were themselves part of the mystery. Palace insiders in this fictional account could only speculate about how long the pages had been overlooked, protected, or deliberately kept out of sight. Charles turned another page. His expression hardened, then softened, then broke. A tear slipped down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away, almost instinctively, as though even now he could not allow himself the vulnerability of being watched. But another tear followed. Camilla saw it, and this time she did not look away, because the most painful revelation had not yet arrived. The final page in the folder was marked differently from the others. It carried no formal heading, no official seal, only a handwritten instruction. Charles stared at it for several seconds before touching it. Camilla knew what it said. That was why her face had gone pale. Charles lifted his eyes toward her. His voice came out barely above a whisper. He wanted to know how long she had known. Camilla did not answer immediately, and in that silence, Charles understood something far more frightening than the contents of the document. Whatever Diana had left behind, Camilla had seen it first. Outside the room, the palace continued moving, unaware that one hidden page was about to reopen a wound, and the page Charles was about to read was the page that could explain why. The page remained between Charles's fingers. For several seconds, he did not turn it. His eyes stayed fixed on the final line, as though reading it again might somehow make the meaning disappear.
Because they are affected. Most police officers I know, I'll say, one of the questions I say to them, do you think you've changed during the 20 years you've been in the force? And they go, yeah, more cynical.
Well, it must be after all the
because
terrible things that they witness.
Yeah.
But do you ever go into a prison and interview a villain and sort of get inside their heads?
Yes,
Yes.
very often.
Yeah.
I had one actually I used her as a character in the Black.
Camilla stood opposite him, watching the realization settle across his face. She knew that moment was coming. She had already lived through it herself. Charles finally looked down. The instruction was brief. It was not written in the formal language of a solicitor. There was no legal terminology, no official seal, no elaborate explanation. It was personal. Diana had apparently wanted the person who eventually found the document to understand that the pages were never meant to be treated as ordinary estate papers. They were meant to be read, and they were meant to be understood. Charles turned the page. Another reference to William appeared. Then Harry. Then something that made him stop completely. Diana had written about the possibility that her sons would grow up knowing only fragments of what she had experienced. She feared that time would soften the details, that official histories would become cleaner than reality, and that the painful parts of the past would eventually be reduced to carefully worded paragraphs. Charles swallowed. That was the part that hurt. Not because it accused him directly, because it suggested that Diana had expected the truth to become distorted after she was gone. Camilla could see the question forming in his eyes. Why had this been hidden? She had asked the same question when she first encountered the material. The answer had not come easily. The old records contained inconsistencies. References appeared to point toward documents that were not where they were supposed to be. Some material seemed to have been separated from the main estate papers, while other references were so vague that they could easily have been dismissed as clerical errors. But then the handwriting appeared.
My mother's belief in the power of that light was an essential part of her faith in God, but also her faith in people, and it is one which I share with my whole heart. It is a belief in the extraordinary ability of each person to touch with goodness and compassion the lives of others, and to shine a light in the world around them. This is the essence of our community, and the very foundation.
And once Diana's handwriting was recognized, dismissing the material became almost impossible. That was when Camilla understood the seriousness of what she had found. She was no longer looking at an old file. She was looking at a message from a woman whose voice had been absent for decades. And that message appeared to challenge the version of events everyone thought they understood. Charles continued reading. Diana's words became increasingly intimate. She wrote about fear. Not the fear of cameras, not the fear of headlines, something deeper. The fear that her children would inherit wounds they did not understand. She appeared to worry that William would eventually become so consumed by duty that he would forget the person underneath the title. She worried that Harry would struggle to find his own place within a system built around succession, hierarchy, and expectation. Most importantly, she wanted both brothers to remember that they were brothers before they were royal figures. Charles lowered the document. His eyes were wet again. For years, public arguments about Diana had centered on marriage, separation, headlines, and blame. But this hidden material shifted the emotional center somewhere else. The children. That was what made the document so difficult to dismiss. If Diana's supposed final message had been nothing more than anger, Charles could have rejected it as the product of pain. But this was different. The pages repeatedly returned to William and Harry, their future, their relationship, their protection, their understanding of their mother. And then Charles noticed something that Camilla had hoped he would not see yet. There was a small mark beside one paragraph, a handwritten symbol. It looked almost insignificant, but beneath it was a short instruction. Read the enclosed page last. Charles looked toward the remaining papers. There was another envelope, cream-colored, unmarked. It had been placed beneath the main document as though someone had deliberately wanted it overlooked. Camilla's expression changed. Charles noticed. He reached toward it. Camilla did not stop him. His fingers touched the envelope, then he hesitated. For the first time since the discovery began, the king seemed genuinely afraid of what a piece of paper might contain. He looked at Camilla. She gave no explanation. Charles opened it. Inside was a single page. The handwriting was unmistakably Diana's. The first sentence was not an accusation. It was a warning. She had apparently anticipated that one day someone would discover what she had left behind, but she also understood that whoever found it might face a terrible choice: tell the truth, or protect the people still living. Charles read the sentence twice, then a third time. The room had become painfully quiet. There are moments in a story when the truth does not arrive like an explosion. It arrives slowly, one sentence at a time, until there is nowhere left to hide. That was what was happening now. And if this story has made one thing clear, it is that hidden family secrets rarely stay hidden forever. If you want more royal stories where the smallest detail can change the entire picture, subscribe now, because the next page takes this discovery into much more dangerous territory. Charles continued. Diana appeared to question whether her sons would ever be given the complete truth about the years surrounding her life and death. She wanted them to understand that public narratives were often shaped by people who had never witnessed the private moments behind them. Then came a line that made Charles's face tighten. She warned that someone might eventually try to decide which parts of her story deserved to survive. Charles stopped reading. He stared at the words. Camilla knew what he was thinking. If that warning was genuine within the story, then the hidden pages were not merely a personal message. They were a challenge to whoever controlled the official version of the past. Charles turned another page. There were references to people Diana had trusted. Some were described warmly, others were mentioned with obvious caution, but the names were not explained. There were no neat accusations. No convenient list of villains, only fragments, names, dates, private meetings, unanswered questions. It was almost as if Diana had deliberately left enough information for her sons to investigate without telling them exactly what conclusion they were supposed to reach. That made the document even more unsettling. Because it did not give Charles an easy enemy, it gave him uncertainty, and uncertainty was dangerous, especially inside a royal family where every private disagreement could eventually become public. Charles looked again at the envelope. Something else was inside, a second sheet. This one was shorter. It contained only a few lines. The first referred to William, the second referred to Harry, the third referred to the woman who would one day stand beside the future king. Charles read it, then froze. Camilla immediately recognized the change in his expression. His eyes moved back to the beginning of the sentence. He read it again. This time his face lost its color, because Diana's message appeared to contain an instruction concerning someone who, at the time Diana wrote it, could not possibly have been the person Charles was now thinking about. Camilla knew exactly why that mattered. The woman mentioned in the document had not yet entered William's life when Diana died. Yet the instruction was remarkably specific. Charles slowly raised his eyes. He looked directly at Camilla, and for the first time, the question between them was no longer about what Diana had written. It was about why Diana's words seemed to point toward a future that neither of them could explain. Charles did not turn the page. He stared at the name. For a moment, even Camilla seemed unable to move. The possibility contained in those few handwritten lines was more disturbing than anything that had come before. Diana appeared to have referred to a woman connected to William's future, someone who had not yet entered his life when those words were supposedly written. Charles looked back at the document, then at Camilla, then back at the name. It was no longer simply a question of what Diana had left behind. It was a question of how much she had anticipated. The room fell into a silence so complete that the faint movement of paper sounded deafening. Camilla had already spent hours trying to understand that passage. She had read it repeatedly, searching for another interpretation, another explanation, anything that could make the words less extraordinary. But the wording remained. Diana had apparently left instructions concerning the person who would one day stand beside William. The implication was impossible to ignore. She had not merely written about her sons. She had written about the future they would enter. And that was when Camilla noticed something else. The page was not the original document. It was an annex, a separate attachment connected to the main material by a handwritten reference. Someone had intentionally kept it apart. The discovery changed the entire character of the file. The main document could have been dismissed as an old personal record. The annex was different. It suggested planning. Diana had apparently anticipated that someone might find the first document but never discover the second. That raised a far more troubling question. How many layers were there? Camilla returned to the archive material. Behind the envelope was another reference number. It led to a small collection of items that had been stored separately from the papers. There were photographs, letters, personal notes, and references to recordings. Nothing in the material, by itself, proved the larger claims surrounding Diana's private fears. Much of it remained open to interpretation. But within the fictional account unfolding around the palace, the collection was presented as a trail of evidence that Diana herself had preserved. Camilla began examining each piece. The first photograph showed Diana in a private setting. The second appeared to capture several people meeting away from the public eye. The third contained a date. Camilla studied it. The date mattered because it corresponded with a period when Diana had reportedly been under intense public pressure. She placed the photograph beside the handwritten notes. The two appeared connected. Then she found another page. This one contained a list of names. There were no explanations beside them, only initials, dates, and short references. Some entries appeared harmless. Others were accompanied by phrases suggesting private conversations and undisclosed meetings. Camilla's attention moved slowly down the page. The deeper she went, the more obvious it became that Diana had not simply written a farewell, she had been keeping a record of people, a record of moments, a record of things she believed should not be forgotten. That discovery changed Camilla's understanding of the hidden will. The document was not simply about inheritance, it was about memory. Diana appeared determined to prevent her own version of events from disappearing beneath the official story. And then came the most unsettling discovery. At the bottom of one page, Diana had written a short instruction concerning William and Harry. They were not to receive everything immediately, they were to receive it when they were old enough to understand the consequences. Camilla stopped reading. That explained why the material could have remained untouched for so long. If the account was to be believed, Diana had deliberately created a delay. She had imagined a future in which her sons were no longer children, a future in which they could examine painful information without being protected from it, a future in which the truth would have to be confronted rather than explained away. And that future had arrived. But there was still something missing: the recordings. Camilla searched the storage references again. One entry stood apart. It referred to a small sealed container. There was no royal insignia, no formal description, only a handwritten instruction: do not destroy. Camilla's hands tightened around the paper. The container was eventually located among the preserved material. It was smaller than expected, plain, wooden, almost forgettable. That was precisely what made it unsettling. The lid carried a handwritten mark, Diana's handwriting again. Camilla opened it. Inside were several aging audio tapes. There were also envelopes containing photographs and letters. One envelope was marked for the people. Another carried a much darker instruction: not to be burned. Camilla looked at the tapes. If they contained what the surrounding notes suggested, they could transform the discovery from a private family matter into something far more consequential. But there was a problem. The equipment required to play them was old. The palace staff had to locate a functioning recorder capable of reading the tapes without damaging them. Until then, Camilla could only look at the labels. One tape contained a date, another contained a brief handwritten description. A third had no date at all. Only a single word: truth. The word remained in Camilla's mind. She understood the danger. A recording could capture emotion that written words could not. It could preserve tone, hesitation, fear, anger. It could reveal whether the woman behind the handwriting sounded certain or frightened. It could make the past feel present again. And that was exactly what happened when the first tape was finally prepared. Camilla stood nearby as the machine was switched on. There was static, then silence, then the unmistakable sound of a woman's breathing. The recording began. The contents were presented within the story as Diana's private recollections, not as independently verified historical evidence. Her voice appeared tired, controlled, and deliberate. She spoke about feeling watched. She spoke about the pressure surrounding her. She spoke about the fear that private conversations could become public. But she returned repeatedly to one subject: her children, William, Harry, their future, their vulnerability. Her greatest fear, according to the recording, was not what would happen to her reputation, it was what would happen to her sons after she was gone. Camilla listened without moving. Then the recording reached a passage that caused her expression to change. Diana appeared to describe the possibility that one day her sons would need someone outside the immediate machinery of the institution to help them understand what had happened to their mother. The wording was careful, but the meaning was unmistakable. She wanted them to have someone they could trust, and then came the reference to the mysterious woman from the annex, the same future figure, the same impossible connection. Camilla stopped the recording. She needed a moment, because now there were two pieces of material pointing toward the same conclusion: the handwritten annex and the audio recording. Neither one alone could answer the mystery. Together, they raised an even larger question: how could Diana have been thinking about a future person who had not yet become part of William's life? There was no easy answer, and the deeper Camilla went, the less comfortable the discovery became. She returned to the final envelope. There was another page inside. This one was addressed to whoever eventually found the collection. It contained a warning. The person who found the material would have to decide whether protecting the living was more important than preserving the truth. Camilla read it slowly. Then she looked toward the door. Charles was still unaware of everything she had discovered. That was the moment the burden changed. Until then, Camilla had been an observer. Now she was responsible for a decision. She could close the envelope, return everything to storage, allow the palace to continue as though nothing had happened, or she could bring the material to Charles. But there was one final document she had not yet opened. It was thinner than the others. It had been placed beneath the recordings, and unlike every other item in the collection, it carried Charles's name. Camilla reached for it. Her fingers stopped just above the envelope, because if Diana had deliberately written something specifically for Charles, there was only one question left. What had she wanted him to read when no one else was listening? Camilla's hand remained above the envelope. For several seconds, she could not bring herself to open it. Charles's name was written across the front in Diana's handwriting. Not William, not Harry. Charles. The man who had once been her husband was now the person staring back at Camilla from a piece of paper written decades earlier. She finally broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet. There were no accusations at the beginning. No dramatic declaration. No list of names. Instead, Diana had apparently written about regret. Not regret over one particular argument or one particular decision, but regret that so much of her life had been consumed by people trying to explain what she felt instead of listening to what she actually said. Camilla read slowly. Then she reached a passage that made her stop. Diana appeared to acknowledge that Charles would one day have to live with the consequences of everything that had happened between them, but she did not write with hatred. The tone was colder than that. It was acceptance. She seemed to understand that some wounds could never be repaired by apologies because time itself had become part of the damage. Camilla lowered the page. For the first time, she understood why this material had been so difficult to confront. It did not offer a simple villain. It offered pain. It offered conflicting memories. It offered a woman trying to make sense of a life that had become public property. And then Diana's message turned toward the future. She appeared to warn that Charles would eventually have to choose between protecting the institution and acknowledging the emotional truth of what had happened. Camilla read that line again, then again. She knew exactly what it meant. If Charles saw the document, he could never unknow it. If William and Harry saw it, they might ask questions that no palace statement could answer. And if the material ever became public, the consequences could reach far beyond one family. Camilla placed the page beside the recordings. The evidence was beginning to form a pattern. The hidden document, the annex, the photographs, the tapes, the private message. None of these items independently proved every claim surrounding Diana's final years. Some remained allegations preserved within the story's account. Others were fragments whose meaning could be interpreted in different ways. But together, they created something far more powerful. A narrative Diana had apparently wanted her sons to confront. Camilla looked at the clock. Charles still knew nothing. That was the moment she made her decision. She would tell him, not because she wanted to destroy him, not because she wanted revenge, and not because she wanted to reopen a chapter that had already caused enough suffering. She would tell him because hiding it now would make her part of the silence. The folder was closed. The tapes were secured. The photographs were placed back into their envelopes. Camilla gathered everything and left the room. Her footsteps echoed through the corridor. Every step brought her closer to Charles, and every step made the decision heavier. When she finally reached him, Charles was expecting an ordinary conversation. He looked up. One glance at her face was enough to tell him that something was wrong. Camilla placed the folder on the table. Charles looked at it, then at her. He asked what it was. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she opened the folder and turned the first page toward him. Charles saw the handwriting. His entire expression changed. He recognized Diana's writing almost instantly. The years disappeared from his face. For a moment, he was no longer looking at a historical document. He was looking at the handwriting of someone who had been part of one of the most painful periods of his life. He touched the page. His fingers trembled, Then he saw the date. He looked at Camilla again. She remained silent. Charles began reading. The first few lines were calm. Then his eyes reached the passage about William. He continued. Then Harry. His breathing became uneven. He reached the paragraph about their future. He stopped. Camilla could see the emotion building. Charles asked whether the document was genuine. Within the story's account, the material had been preserved alongside archival references and personal items, but its extraordinary claims remained matters of allegation rather than established historical fact. Charles seemed less concerned with that distinction than with one devastating reality. Diana had written these words, or someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make it appear that she had. Either possibility demanded answers. Then Charles discovered the annex. He read the passage concerning the woman who would eventually stand beside William. His eyes widened. He read it twice. Camilla watched him. He asked whether she had known about that passage. She answered honestly. Yes. Charles's face hardened. He asked how long. Camilla hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than an immediate answer could have. Charles understood that she had not just discovered the material moments earlier. She had studied it. She had listened to the recordings. She had read the private notes. She had seen Diana's words before him, and she had made a decision about what he should know. Charles leaned back. His eyes filled. He asked why she had not come to him immediately. Camilla's answer was quiet, because she had been afraid of what the truth might do to him. The room went silent. Charles looked down again. He picked up the page addressed to him. He began reading aloud. His voice was steady for the first few sentences. Then it weakened. Diana appeared to be telling him that there was no point pretending the past had not happened. No point polishing it. No point turning pain into something more comfortable simply because history preferred clean stories. Charles stopped. He pressed the page against the table. His shoulders dropped. Camilla watched him struggle to maintain control. Another tear rolled down his cheek. He wiped it away. Then another appeared. This time he did not hide it. The man who had spent decades living beneath the weight of a crown suddenly looked like someone confronting an old grief that had never truly left. Camilla moved closer, but Charles raised a hand. He needed to continue alone. He picked up the letter again. At the bottom was another passage. This one concerned Diana's greatest fear. Not what people would say about her, not what would happen to her reputation. Her fear was that William and Harry would inherit the consequences of their parents' pain, that they would spend their lives carrying a conflict they had never created, that they would allow bitterness to become part of their identities. Charles read the final sentence. His lips began to tremble. Then he stopped completely. Camilla could see that he was no longer reading about the past. He was thinking about his sons. And suddenly, the meaning of the hidden will changed. This was not simply about Diana. It was about what she believed would happen to William and Harry if the past remained unresolved. Charles lowered the paper. He looked toward Camilla with tears covering his face. Then came the question that had been waiting since the moment she entered the room. He asked whether William and Harry knew. Camilla did not answer, not yet, because there was one final piece of the discovery that Charles had not seen. The recording, the one marked with a single word, truth. Camilla knew what was on it, and she knew that once Charles heard Diana's voice speaking about him, there would be no way to return to the silence that had protected the family for so long. Charles reached toward the recorder. His hand shook. Camilla watched him press the button. Static filled the room. Then the recording began. A woman's breathing emerged through the noise. A familiar voice followed, and within seconds, Charles's face collapsed, because Diana was speaking about the one thing he had spent years trying to bury, himself. The recording began with static. Then Diana's voice emerged. For several seconds, she said nothing. There was only the faint sound of breathing, followed by the subtle movement of paper somewhere near the microphone. Charles stared at the recorder. Camilla did not move. Then the voice finally came through clearly. The words were quiet, controlled, but there was something underneath them that made Charles's expression change almost immediately. Diana was speaking about regret. She spoke about the things left unsaid, about the conversations that had ended before either person had truly said what they meant. about the danger of allowing years to turn painful memories into convenient versions of the past. Charles lowered his eyes. The recording continued. Within the fictional account, Diana's words suggested that she did not want her sons to inherit hatred. She did not want William or Harry to spend their lives deciding which parent had been right and which had been wrong. She wanted them to understand that families could fail without every person inside them being entirely evil. That sentence seemed to reach Charles differently. His face tightened. He covered his mouth with one hand. The recording continued. Diana spoke about William's future. She spoke about the weight that would eventually fall upon him, the crown, the expectations, the endless scrutiny. She warned that becoming king could mean losing pieces of himself if he allowed duty to become more important than humanity. Then she spoke about Harry. Her voice softened. She wanted him to know that being second in line did not make him less important. She wanted both brothers to remember that titles could change, positions could change, public opinion could change, but they would always share something no institution could manufacture. They were brothers. Charles closed his eyes. A tear moved slowly down his cheek. Then Diana's voice changed. She began speaking directly about him. Charles opened his eyes. He stared at the recorder as though he could see through the machine and into the past. The recording did not portray a simple villain. It portrayed a complicated relationship filled with hurt, disappointment, and things that had never been resolved. That made it harder to hear. Diana appeared to acknowledge that Charles had his own pressures, his own fears, and his own obligations. But she also appeared to insist that understanding those pressures did not erase the pain she had experienced. Charles's breathing became heavier. He looked toward Camilla. She said nothing. The recording continued. Diana's message eventually returned to one final subject: forgiveness. Not the easy kind, not forgiveness that pretended nothing had happened. She appeared to distinguish between forgiving someone and pretending the damage had never existed. Charles lowered his head. His shoulders began to shake. For a moment, he tried to regain control. He could not. The tears came openly now. The document slipped from his hand and landed on the table. Camilla watched him break down. There was no camera, no audience, no speechwriter, no palace official standing nearby to tell him what expression to wear. There was only Charles and the voice of Diana, the woman whose life had become one of the most intensely discussed chapters of the royal family's modern history. The woman whose memory had survived long after the arguments, headlines, and photographs had faded. Charles finally spoke. His voice was broken. He said he wished he had understood some things sooner. Then he stopped. The sentence was never finished. He wiped his face, but the tears continued. Camilla remained beside him. She had wanted him to know. Now he did. And the cost of knowing was visible. But the discovery was not finished. William had to be told. Harry had to be told. And the most difficult decision remained. What would happen to Diana's words? Would they stay locked away? Would they be given privately to her sons? Or would they eventually become public? Charles looked at the papers spread across the table. For years, the royal family had lived with the knowledge that Diana's story belonged partly to the public. But this material was different. It was intimate. It was painful. And within this fictional account, it contained allegations and interpretations that could never simply be released without consequences. Charles knew that. Camilla knew that. The question was whether protecting the family meant protecting the silence, or whether protecting the family meant finally allowing the truth to be confronted. That was when William entered. He immediately noticed his father's face. He stopped. His eyes moved toward Camilla, then toward the papers. He knew something had happened. Charles tried to speak. His voice failed. William stepped closer. He saw Diana's handwriting. Everything changed. He picked up one of the pages. His eyes moved across the words. The silence between father and son became almost unbearable. William's expression hardened as he read, then softened, then hardened again. He did not need every detail explained. He could see that his father was devastated. He could see that Camilla had been the person who brought the material forward, and he could see his mother's handwriting on pages that had apparently remained hidden for years. The questions came quickly. Why had this been separated? Who had known? Why had nobody told them? And most importantly, what had Diana wanted them to do with it? Charles had no simple answer. Neither did Camilla. The only certainty was that the past had returned with a force none of them had expected. William looked down at the final message concerning him and Harry. His expression changed. For all the accusations and unanswered questions, one message stood above everything else. Diana wanted her sons to remain brothers. That was her most powerful request. Not revenge, not destruction, not a war against the institution. Her sons, their bond, their future. William placed the page back on the table. He understood what made the discovery so painful. Diana's greatest fear was not simply that her story would be misunderstood. It was that her children would spend their lives fighting over the pieces of it. Charles looked at his son. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then Charles reached for William's hand. It was a small gesture, almost invisible, but it carried the weight of everything that had just been read. The story that had begun with a hidden document had ended somewhere neither of them expected. Not with a royal scandal, not with a dramatic declaration, but with a father confronting the possibility that some of the most important conversations of his life had ended before he understood what they meant. And with a son realizing that his mother's final concern had never been about winning an argument. It had been about protecting her children from inheriting one. The material would remain controversial. Its extraordinary claims would remain matters of speculation within the story, not established historical fact. But the emotional question could not be dismissed. What happens when a family spends decades trying to move forward, only to discover words from the past that refuse to stay buried? That was the question Charles was left facing. He looked once more at Diana's handwriting. His eyes filled again. This time, he did not wipe the tears away. He simply held the page. And perhaps that was the most revealing image of the entire story. Not a king defending a crown, not a palace protecting an institution. Just a grieving man holding words from someone he could never speak to again. Camilla had opened the door. Diana's words had walked through it. And Charles had finally been forced to listen. The story's deepest revelation was not that a hidden document could threaten a monarchy. It was that behind every royal title, every ceremony, and every carefully constructed public image were people carrying memories that no official statement could completely erase. Diana's supposed final message had brought the past back into the room. It had forced Charles to confront pain he could not rewrite. It had reminded William of the responsibility his mother had placed upon him, and it had left one final warning hanging over the family. Do not allow the past to destroy the future. If there was one thing Diana's words seemed determined to leave behind, it was that. The crown would continue. The institution would continue. The public would continue to debate the people who wore it, but William and Harry would still have to decide what kind of brothers they wanted to be, and Charles would still have to live with everything he had finally heard. The recording clicked off. Silence returned. Charles remained seated. His eyes were still wet. The papers remained on the table. Nothing had been solved completely, but something had changed. The silence had been broken, and once a silence like that is broken, it can never be restored in exactly the same way. If this story made you stop and think about how much pain can remain hidden behind a public life, leave your thoughts in the comments. Like the video if you believe difficult truths should be confronted rather than buried, share it with someone who follows the royal family's complicated history, and subscribe for more stories where the smallest hidden detail can change everything. Because sometimes the most powerful legacy is not a title. It is a voice that refuses to disappear.